How's it going, guys? It's Prod here, back with part 5 of What If the Earthlings Were Strong. Last time we left off with Tien getting some answers about himself and the Triclops, all in order to try to figure out how to control his newfound powers. At some point, Tien goes to Supreme Kai to get some help with getting him to Universe 6. And while he was at it, Tien also got help from Elder Kai in unlocking his potential, though that came with some complications that Tien hopes that the Triclops can resolve. Now that Tien is fully prepared for the journey, he and Supreme Kai have set off to Universe 6. So without further ado, let's see what's next for Tien in Universe 6 and how he'll handle the trials ahead. Supreme Kai and Tien have Kai to planet Namek in Universe 6. They arrive high in the air, so that way they can get a better look at their surroundings first, and also to not have the Namekians start a panic at their sudden arrival. What Supreme Kai and Tien see are a lot of Namekians going about their day-to-day lives. However, this comes as a surprise to both of them, mainly because back in the Tournament of Power, Tien clearly remembers that Sonel and Panera telling Piccolo and Gohan about how they formed a mass fusion in order to try to win the Tournament of Power. And as far as Tien knows, the fusions for Namekians is a pretty permanent thing. So seeing so many Namekians out and about makes him a little bit confused on what's going on. Eventually, after getting their bearings, the two decide to head down to one of the villages that they can see and talk to some of the Namekians there in order to get an audience with the Grand Elder, because the Grand Elder is most likely to know how to get in contact with the Triclops. And it doesn't take long for them to meet the Grand Elder, due to Supreme Kai being an actual god and the subject being the Triclops, which are sacred friends to the Namekian people. During the conversation with the Grand Elder, Tien discovers a couple of things, one of which is the reason for why there are so many Namekians. The reason being that after the Tournament of Power, the Yardrak that was on Universe 6 let his people know that the Namekians have made a great sacrifice in order to help the universe. With this being known to the Yardrak's people, the Yardrak sent over some of their most skilled users of spirit control in order to perform the Spirit Fissure. This is a technique basically designed to defuse people. It's pretty much the perfect counter to a fusion. The other thing that Supreme Kai and Tien discover is that the only way to get to the Triclops planet is by Tien being escorted by the Namekians' most trusted and valued warriors, which just so happens to be Sonel and Panera. After getting confirmation from the Grand Elder, Supreme Kai decides to leave Tien with the Namekians, stating that he'll arrive back within a year to check up on how he's doing. And Tien is fine with this because Tien wants to spend time with the Triclops, but he also doesn't want to stay too long because he does have his own life in Universe 7 that he's not really ready to just give up. So after Supreme Kai leaves, Tien meets up with Sonel and Panera and gets ready for their journey to Zoid, the planet of the Triclops. Before they can leave, a lot of the Dragon Clan of the Namekians have to prepare their ship in order to make sure that it is as safe as possible, so that way it cannot be tracked while they go on this secret journey to planet Zoid. And also, so that way the Dragon Clan can use their mystic art to get in contact with the three-eyed people in order to give them a heads up that Tien is on his way. After all of this is said and done, Tien and the two warrior Namekians get into the heavily enchanted spaceship and finally make their way to planet Zoid. While in transit, they make small talk and spar a little. Tien noticing that even though they are no longer fused as they were during the Tournament of Power, they're still relatively strong, even after Tien has had his potential semi-unlocked. Tien also notices with his keen eye that the two Namekians look a little different. The shading of the green is a lot lighter than what they were during the Tournament of Power. And when Tien brings this up during one of their small talk conversations, the two Namekians kind of brush it off as just an unforeseen side effect of the defusion, and Tien just leaves it at that. The journey is mostly an uneventful one, as it takes a couple of days to go from one planet to another. However, there is one thing to note here that happens while they're traveling, and that is at some point during their travels, Tien sensed a very familiar energy that wasn't from their spaceship, but just somewhere out there near their ship, and it was moving at the same speed as them. However, the energy was only there for a moment. Even though Tien can feel that it was familiar, he can't quite pinpoint it, and the energy disappeared very quickly. Once he brings it up to his escorts, they both say that they didn't sense anything and that the ship didn't detect anything strange either, though they will stay on guard just in case. Around the fourth day, the ship suddenly stops as it says they have reached their destination. However, as Tien takes a look, all he sees is the vast emptiness of space. There is not a planet in sight. and Tien's wondering what is going on. But a moment later, there is a pulse of energy that passes over the entire ship and hitting everyone at once as it passes by. Shortly after that pulse, Tien hears a voice in his head, and looking at the other two's faces, Tien can tell that they can hear it too, as the voice says, "Welcome, honored warriors of Shinran, Granera, and Solnel, and welcome, lost warrior, Tien Shinhan. Be at ease, as we will guide your ship to land." Then the voice fades from their mind. Tien is excited for what's to come next, but he is taken back by some of the words that the voice decided to use. Lost warrior seems to be a bit much, but he supposes it's not entirely inaccurate, so it's fair enough. But Tien says aloud, "Warriors of Shinran?" And Solnel looks at Tien and says, "Well, I guess we can't hide it any longer." He goes on to explain that they're not actual warriors of Shinran, but they have been recognized by Shinran for their efforts during the Tournament of Power, and have been blessed by the Great Dragon, which explains their slightly different coloration. And there's a couple of more surprises there, but they won't really get into that yet. As they land and exit the ship, Tien has a chance to take in his surroundings and marvel at the breathtaking sight. A lot of what he sees reminds him of planet Earth. However, everything has a slight mystic look or feel to it. But Tien can't ponder on this for long, because while he was awestruck, 3 people suddenly appear right in front of him. A second later, Tien realizes that what they just used was instant transmission, and all 3 of the strangers in front of him all share the same characteristic, that being having 3 eyes and 4 arms. There are 2 males and 1 female. The 2 males look similar to each other, but not overly so. One is very tall and buff, while the other one is a little on the shorter side, has a more slim physique. Imagine Yama and Spofovich, but without the crazy veins and the evil-like demeanor. And of course, they have the characteristics of the Triclops: 3 eyes and 4 arms. The female looks very imposing, as she is of slimmer build herself and has long blue hair. The female speaks up and says, "We will be the ones to train you and see if you're worthy to meet the leader of our people, Lost Warrior Tien." Over here are the twins. The big brawny one is Rek, and the short one is Tang. Rek would be your first instructor, with Tang being your second, and I, Salandra, being your final instructor, in order to see you're worthy to actually have an audience with the Trigon Council. Before you can move on to the next instructor, you have to pass a trial over the lessons that instructor taught you. And then Salandra looks past Tien towards the 2 Namekian warriors and says, "You 2 will also begin training while he is here, mostly to pass the time for you all, because you can't leave until Tien is ready to leave, and also to test out Shinran's chosen." And then Salandra looks back towards Tien and says, "I know you must have questions for us, Tien. However, we simply do not care. Right now, you stand as an outsider. Until you prove otherwise, we won't waste our time answering your very simple questions. So, choice is yours. You can either leave now or partake in the trials and be judged." And Tien says, without any hesitation, that he will gladly accept the trial, and he will meet the Trigon Council, and he will get his answers, for Tien knows that he is worthy. And so begins the undertaking of Tien's trial, as Rek is the first one to escort Tien to the trial grounds. Rek explains a couple of things as they get there. Firstly, that Tien will be training in a form of a hyperbolic time chamber. And the reason that they're going in a time chamber is because the Trigon Council wants Tien to be ready by the end of the week, meaning that they have about 7 days. So, in order to make sure that Tien is ready, they'll be going through the time chamber. The time chamber is set for 1 day out here in the real world equals 1 month in there. So Tien has about 7 months to finish all of the trials. Tien notices that the timeline is a little weird, or it does seem a little fast, either way you look at it. But Rek explains that this is also part of the trials. They'll also be testing to see how natural it is for him to learn the ways of the Triclops. So with all that explained, they enter the time chamber, and month 1 begins. Rek explains that the first part of the training, for the remainder of the trials and his remaining time on planet Zoid, Tien must always have 4 arms out at all times. Under no circumstances is he ever to put away the extra 2 limbs. Tien abides by this and immediately manifests his other 2 arms. Rek begins by explaining that the first trial is hand-to-hand combat. They'll be testing to see how good Tien is in an actual fight and how well he can actually move. The trial will have a lot of other hitting things, but Tien should be good enough to understand what those are during this part of the trial. And so Rek gets into a fighting position and they begin. For next month, they fight each other and they don't really take any breaks. In fact, it's almost an non-stop fighting session, as Tien is getting used to fighting with full arm. He hasn't really brought out his second pair of arms in a long time, and he admits that he is quite sluggish when it comes to using them, at least at first. But then later on, Tien does become very adept at using all four of his arms. This is due in part to him already being a master of martial arts and having years and years of combat experience under his belt. He's able to quickly utilize every facet of his body to a large degree. He also realizes that this isn't just strictly hand-to-hand combat in the sense that they're only using their arms. No, Rek ends up using every part of his body, utilizing it in every way possible, finding new angles to attack from, forcing Tien to figure out new ways to block or dodge and then counterattack with any part of Tien's body. Tien also realizes that you can use the forearms to kind of hide your movement, as it's very hard to keep track of what's going on at all times. At some point, Tien does realize that he has been underutilizing himself. He's never really fought at full potential, for the extra limbs offer not only extra offensive capabilities, but defensive capabilities, allowing him to block from positions that should be unblockable. Also, this is more of a fight of endurance, as it does take some energy for him to maintain having his two arms out, seeing how he's not a naturally full-born Triclops. He only has some Triclops in his DNA, so having forearms out isn't something that Tien can do at no cost at all. So not only does he have to learn how to conserve his energy, but being able to fight at long periods of times, he has to use the most minimum effort possible in order to not overexert himself. The one saving grace is that Tien is actually stronger than Rek during this entire fighting session. However, Rek is a master at hand-to-hand combat. It seems to be his preferred style of fighting and a specialization for him. In the beginning, the strength difference didn't really matter, as Rek was clearly just more skilled. But towards the end, Tien does slowly get to the point where Rek actually is becoming not really that much of a challenge. And Tien has learned almost all of the forms and special ways that Rek used in order to fully utilize his entire body. Towards the end of the first month, Rek stops Tien and says, "Alright, it's time to take the final test to see if you pass my part of the trial." And then Rek goes on to say, "You are not allowed to use the multiform technique, but you must beat me as I use mine." And then Rek, utilizing the multiform technique, makes 4 more clones of himself, having Tien to fight 5 Reks at the same time. Fight begins, and it is very hard as all the Reks are equally strong to the original, but Tien is holding on, even though he's mostly on the defensive, and if need be, he can use cant. There was no rule stating that he couldn't, so if the situation calls for it, he'll wait for an opportunity to use cant to get rid of each clone slowly but surely. While Tien is fighting all 5 of them, he always has to keep track of each one of their movements. Each one has 4 arms, and each one is always in a position doing a different thing. And in order to not get beaten, and also to find that opening that he's looking for, he subconsciously starts utilizing his eyes and his ki to make some form of mind's eye over the entire battlefield. He then starts using his third eye to start tracking ki even further, so that way he's never caught off guard and he always knows what's about to happen, and hopefully maybe stun one of the clones. Seeing how they're now separated, they should be easier to manipulate. It is at this point that Tien does notice something that look quite odd, as Tien notices an extra Rek just barely within sight of his mind's eye as he's fighting the other 5. He notices that this Rek is charging up an attack, and very soon this Rek is coming straight perfectly in Tien's blind spot, aiming to hit him over the head and knocking him out. But right before this happens, Tien uses one of his 4 arms and he catches the punch, while also using cant times 10 to completely halt all the momentum that this Rek has brought. And with that Rek says, "Very good, you have passed the trials. Not only have you utilized your hands and feet, but you have made great use of your eyes. Now you know why the third eye is important. It enhances our ability of perception, making us being able to track things way easier than most other races. With this, I say you pass." And that was the end of the first month. Moving into the second month, Tien is now met with Tang, the smaller twin. Tang says that this trial will be to see how good you are at utilizing your ki, and to see if you can utilize the ki technique that all Triclops know, which is ki materialization. Tien says he's heard of this, but he himself have never really used this technique. Tang explains that it is a form of ki manipulation and allows the user to use their ki to manifest and make an object out of it, depending on what the user deems necessary. For example, and then all of a sudden, Tang's body is surrounded by a glowing light of ki. And once the light dims, Tien sees what seems to be very heavy battle armor made out of ki. Tang is now wrapped in heavy battle armor, so much so that he's actually grown in height, being actually taller than Rek, now engulfed in his armor. And also, in each one of Tang's hands is some form of weapon or shield. In the lower two hands, Tang has a tower shield in each, and in the upper two, there is a mace in his right, and in the upper left, there is some type of arm cannon. Tien is entirely shocked by this transformation. It's almost like Tang became a completely different person, and he can sense with his ki that Tang's ki is ultra refined. There is not a gap in the ki or in Tang's armor. But if Tien has to fight this, he figures that Tang will probably be pretty slow. However, that is actually a wrong assumption, as Tang says, well, we will begin. And it immediately appears right in front of Tien. Because of Tien's momentary shock, he's now able to defend himself as an uppercut with the mace hits Tien across the face. And then the two shields ram into Tien's body, pushing Tien pretty far away, with the arm cannon taking aim, charging up, but deciding not to fire. All this happens in quick succession before Tien realizes what happened. And by the time Tien steadies himself and gets back into a fighting position, he notices that he could have already been shot at by that arm cannon while he was flying away. And Tang says, alright, first thing you need to know is, because this is my ki, it doesn't abide by the normal rules of physics. I can move my ki very easily. So to me, it's not heavy at all. I can move just as fast in this armor, if not faster, than I can move out the armor. That is because I'm in constant control of my ki, moving it how I see fit. So, if you ever meet another Triclops warrior or anyone else that uses ki materialization, just know that it doesn't have to abide by the normal rules or whatever that ki took the form of. You are the master of your ki does what you will it to do. Now, I'll teach you how to materialize your ki so that way we can actually begin the fighting process. For the next 2 months, Tien spends this time working on ki materialization, shaping his ki into all different forms, whether it be weapons, armor, or heck, even just blocks of rock. He does this until he gets the creation process down pat. Next is the durability process, which is how durable he can make the ki before someone can break it. This is actually a very hard process to get down pat, but after a while he does succeed in that too. Now it comes to the final stage where it's time to see if Tien can pass this trial. As Tang tells Tien that they're going to have one fight, and it's not going to be really about who wins or loses, but how well Tien utilizes his new form abilities, see how much he has actually learned during these past 2 months. So Tien decides to materialize quarterstaff, something that he feels very comfortable using. And also he materialized the clothes that he used to wear during the time he spent teaching at his dojo, making it as durable as possible so that way he has the same properties as Saiyan armor, except on a way higher scale. And then they begin the fight. Tien makes very good use of his quarterstaff. At first, Tang is thinking that Tien is not making full use of it, seeing how, well, he doesn't have to use his full arms the entire time. Thinking that maybe Tien has neglected his previous teachings with Rek, and Tang's about to scold him until Tien's quarterstaff slowly transforms mid-hit into a bow staff. A slight difference, but a difference nonetheless, as Tien goes from a thrusting type of motion into a swinging type of motion, and starts swinging the bow staff over and over all around him. And then, even furthermore, mid-sequence, the staff splits into 3 different segments, with chain connecting each segment, so that way it now not only gives Tien a little bit more reach, but it also gives him very much different angles of attack. And then Tien switches it up over and over, playing constant shifting motions and fluidity in his attacks, all ranging so that way his opponent Tang never really knows what Tien is going to do next, or what angle Tien might attack from, as Tien's weapons is ever changing. The fight goes on as Tien's clothes are ripped apart and his body is battered and his quarterstaff is broken, and it seems like Tien is holding 2 broken staffs until they shimmer and he connects them again into a bow staff. Tang looks even worse for wears, as Tang's armor looks very broken and even his shields look cracked and crumbled, and his arm cannon doesn't even look like it's usable. Then Tang's entire equipment shimmers, but instead of reforging itself, it just dissipates. And with that, Tang says, "You have passed my portion of the trial. You may now go to the final part." And all that took 2 months. So Tien thinks nothing of it as he's on to the last trial, knowing that he has 4 months or 4 days in the outside world left to go. And he thinks he's making pretty good timing for whatever this last trial is going to be about. As Slender shows up into the time chamber, and she tells him that this is either going to go very fast or this is going to be your longest trial yet. This is all dependent on you, Tien. In order to pass my trials, you have to learn one technique and one technique alone. But you will not be able to learn or utilize this technique if your mind is not in tune with the rest of you. As you know, for Rek, the first trial was all about your body, your physicality. Second trial with Tang was about your spirit, ki control. This trial is going to be about your mind and having it sync up with the rest of you in order to unleash your full potential. We have known since you arrived here that you have not been at your best. There is some doubt clouding you. There is something blocking your abilities. Rek and Tang has told me the attempts that you have made in order to control their ki, which is good that you know that you have this ability, but it's also a clear indicator as any your mind is not in the right place to utilize this ability. I've seen the symptoms many times before to know what is wrong. But again, all I can do is guide you in the direction that you need to be. Fixing it is then up to you. First off, Tien, you need to think back to what changed. You have clear signs that you know how to use some of our techniques when it comes to utilizing your arms, when it comes to utilizing your third eye, and when it comes to utilizing your ki to make hard constructs or the multi-form technique. However, since you arrived here, you have clearly been not practicing any of these forms or techniques, either because you was unable or you was unwilling. You need to look deep within inside yourself, Tien, and you need to understand when you stopped utilizing the gifts of the Triclops and when you started to hinder yourself. Call me when you have your answer, when your mind is clear. And with that, Salandra walks off to the distance, sits down and meditates. Tien sits there and thinks about it, realizing that the last trial is him utilizing his third eye and utilizing the technique to take control of other people's ki. He's been able to sense and see ki for a while now, ever since his training in Hyperbolic Time Chamber on Earth. However, he has not been able to take control of one's ki, not once, since he discovered that he had the ability to do it. Now he's been training here with other Triclops. He's realized how much he has been underutilizing himself, how much he's been neglecting the advantages that he had with his body, how much he hasn't really been using his eyes to his full potential in terms of perception and developing a mind's eye by combining his insane perception with his ki sensing abilities, and how much he has not been utilizing his forearms. But all of these clearly would have been a huge advantage for him in any fight he would have had. Tien starts to think back to when he used his moves often and to when he stopped using it. He remembered he used it in the early days of his martial arts career. He used his abilities quite frequently. His multiform, his forearms, heck, he remembers using eye beams all those long years ago. But at some point, he stopped using it. At some key point, he no longer depended on those aspects of himself. He starts to wonder what changed and what that point was. This takes some time, as Tien also has to meditate on this. Remember the early days where he trained at the Crane School while utilizing these abilities. He recognizes that he wasn't a great person back then, but he honestly didn't think he was doing anything really wrong. He was just raised and brought up to be like that. Tien was never truly evil at any point, but he was brought up to be an assassin, and he did do some assassin deeds. But at some point, after his encounter with Goku, his life changed. He remembers that after fighting Goku, and after coming to terms with Goku and realizing that he shouldn't be attacking Goku in the way that he was, he realized that after meeting Goku that he changed his ways. It's not like Goku was the problem. Goku just showed him a better path. Still, Tien has no regrets about this. No regrets about meeting Goku and adventuring with Goku and going down the path that Goku was going down. So that part of his mind is crystal clear. But then as Tien meditates even more on this, it's been days, weeks, trying to decipher the key factor, trying to pretty much give himself self-therapy. What truly changed him and why he repressed himself. It's because Tien felt ashamed. It's because after meeting Goku, Tien realized that he was, for the first time in his life, he was in the wrong. And he set out on a journey to change himself and become a better person with Chiaotzu, to get away from the evil that the Crane School instilled in them. And it was at that point that, even though he didn't forget some of the techniques that the Crane School taught him, he kind of kept some as a punishment to himself. He kind of limited himself as a form of punishment. Not only did he no longer use his natural born abilities, but he also used the life-risking abilities of the Crane School, like the Tri-Beam. The Tri-Beam utilizes your own life force, which is a move that Tien has used against many foes throughout his life ever since meeting Goku. And it was at this moment that Tien might have been just punishing himself for endangering Krillin, who is now one of his best friends, and Goku and Master Roshi's lives, because Tien was misguided and has always stuck with him. Even though years has passed since then, he never forgot this turning point. Ever since he became friends with Goku, Tien has not been himself on purpose. Tien has, at the very least, subconsciously always using the Tri-Beam as a constant reminder of the bad lifestyle that he used to live, but also using it to help those in need, like when he fought against Cell. Even though it was hurting and killing him, he did it for his friends, in order to give them time, in order to help the world, in order to feel justified for his past action. Even dying a couple of times that he has, him dying didn't reset the scale. It didn't make him forget what he did all those years ago. In a way, Tien probably never felt like he needed to be redeemed, felt like he couldn't be redeemed. But now, things are different. Now Tien realizes that he can no longer let this defeat him, that he has to recognize that even though he was in the wrong at one point in time, he hasn't been since then. Tien takes this opportunity to fully immerse himself in meditative state and calm his own heart and center his mind. Tien has to come to terms to what he was and who he will be. And after a while of this, about another month, 2 more, 3 more, and on the last month, Tien opens his eyes. He sees the world in a new light. And he looks towards Salandra as she is already standing up and looking back at him, feeling the change in Tien's ki, feeling the change in his soul. He sees her ki as she is about to charge a beam at him, and he focuses. And before she can release it, he holds it, stopping it from being released even from her hand, bringing a smile to Tien's face and to Salandra's face. And then her third eye flashes, and the control that Tien had over her ki disappears completely, and the ki blast comes straight for him, and he has to block it himself. This is where Salandra says, "And now you are finally ready to learn the Triclops' true ki technique." The Yardras calls their technique spirit control, and we know a lot about it too. But this technique, the Yardras does not know. Only the Triclops has the privilege to utilize this technique that I'm about to teach you. And the technique is called spirit domination. So Tien, warrior who was once lost, let the lesson begin. So the last couple of weeks of the last month, Tien trains vigorously in order to get a full handle on spirit domination. And though he doesn't have it to a skill of mastery yet, he can still use it adequately enough. And that's when Salandra comes out of the time chamber with Tien in tow, and they go meet the Trigon Council. An instant transmission later, and they are in a secluded room where Tien immediately feels that he's being watched from 3 different angles. And you can feel the intense pressure of the being's energies that is within this room. 3 separate beings, but at the same time they feel the same, as if they are 3 but also 1. As Tien looks up, he realizes that these 3 beings are 1 huge, 2 shrouded by darkness that he can't really make out a figure. There is nothing distinguishable about them besides each of them having 3 eyes, indicating that they are still Triclops, just enormous Triclops. You knew that the Triclops people were tall, but these 3 shadowy, obscured Triclops are easily 20 feet tall, sitting down as they look at him, and in unison, they say, "So you have arrived." Before Tien can say anything, the room changes, going from a dark room with a single light source, barely making it so that way the Trigon Council can even be seen. It goes from that to the entire room changing color, more of a purplish type of void, but also the space around him also seems to be cracking all over, kind of like a glass on the verge of shattering. Tien also realizes that he can't move. He can still see. He's still here, but he can't move. And with this sight and hearing still enabled, he notices 2 things. 1, Trigon Council, when they said that, wasn't looking at him, but they're looking behind him. And 2, Tien hears footsteps walking behind him, slowly but confidently, walking into the room that they've just now entered. And the man behind him, with a very similar voice that he's heard before, says, "I finally made it. The name is Hit, and I've come to assassinate you 3. And that is where we're going to end it, as apparently Universe 6 #1 assassin, Hit, has come here for the heads of the Trigon Council. Stay tuned for next time, as Tien is definitely going to have to utilize everything that he has learned, and maybe even more, as no doubt Tien will not stand by and watch this happen, for he is a warrior. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed it. Leave a like and a comment down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.